Hi, I'm Ann Steffen. I'm on faculty at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and I'm affiliated with the Optimal Aging Center. This is an overview of the Skills for Caregiving personalized module from Treating Later Life Depression by Oxford University Press. As you can see in the second edition of the workbook, we've moved this into a modular approach where clients and clinicians together are making decisions on which problem areas they want to specifically target as a part of their depression treatment. So in the Skills for Caregiving module, we'll be walking through a range of different approaches that you might use for one of your clients who's struggling with caregiving related challenges. And, as we get started, I'll just sort of make a point that for all of us, as we're learning an intervention, as we're using any clinical materials for the first couple of times, we end up feeling awkward, not very confident. So, my experience is that, at least for me, it takes using materials with at least 2 to 3 different clients before I feel comfortable. So we've developed the second edition to make these materials as straightforward and clinician friendly as possible. The key points that you want to be making within session, discussion questions that would be good for processing within session are all provided on the Learn forms. And so, we've really tried to minimize what you're expected to remember on your own and really make this easy to pick up and just get started using. So the best way to learn how to apply any intervention is to roll up our sleeves and use it with clients. Don't worry about doing it perfectly. Just go ahead and try these out and see which ones really resonate with the specific clients as a part of your practice. We also want to point out that although some of you may be doing brief structured such as integrated within primary care and EAP models or care management, where a variety of learn and practice materials from the workbook across a number of modules may fit for you. For those of you who are working in traditional psychotherapy, we'd like to encourage you to not jump from module to module to module with great frequency. So, we're working on helping individuals develop systematically healthier approaches to managing their depression and improving the quality of their daily life. So we're going to call upon this concept of habits, which is great in use with middle-aged and older adults because it emphasizes the fact that a lot of repetitions involved in applying something day after day, week after week, that we have to overlearn and develop backup plans to manage situations of higher stress. And so we've really tried to draw upon what we know in the science of habit formation and habit change as we've developed the second edition. So in this orientation video, what I'm going to be doing is providing a relatively brief overview of the Skills for Caregiving, Reducing Stress While Helping Others personalized module. I'll make a couple of tips and reminders about managing within session therapy process issues. I'll be highlighting some of the page numbers where you could look in the clinician guide for additional information. And, it is the case that as you go through this overview, you're likely to get the most out of this if you've got the Later Life Depression workbook and the clinician guide in front of you, given the fact that we're going to be referring to those with relative frequency. In this brief overview, which is provided in chapter 14 of the clinician guide, so pages 231 to 253, you'll notice that there's caregiving is a complex issue. So we attend to a number of different challenges and strategies for use with caregivers. And as you can see, correspondingly, there's quite a large number of both Learn forms that have didactic information that could be used within session, as well as between session practice forms. As a reminder, we would never expect you to use all the modules in this workbook with any given client, nor would we expect you to use all of the materials in any given module of the client. So these aren't intended to be page after page after page, systematically going through all of them. Instead, you and your clients are going to be looking at topics and really kind of making a decision as to some of the things that are particularly challenging for them to focus on in your work together. And in the clinician guide, we have identified with a superscript T the materials that have been identified as the most helpful for use in telehealth practice. So all of our work in treating later life depression has been in the context of age as a intersecting facet of diversity with other identities. And so we like to call upon Pam Hayes' addressing framework as just a reminder that your client's age and generational status are definitely going to be related to other identities that they hold and that are important to them. And so some of the recommendations that Pam Hayes makes that are related to ensure that our assessments are really emphasizing cultural respect and that we're focused on identifying culturally related strengths and support values. And that in our work in therapy, we're wanting to clarify which of the concerns are really related environment, either physical environment or social environment, that we might want to target and problem solve together for to maximize that person environment fit. And then which facets of a client's problem are related to things that are skills or things that they need to change within themselves in terms of either behavioral strategies or their self-talk, with again attention to what's culturally relevant and what's culturally appropriate. So we do this in a couple of different ways in the earlier module, that's the orientation module, Skills for Getting Started. And there are two examples here that we have a Start 11 Learn form that provides an opportunity in celebrating diversity to sit and discuss this material together with the client and identify the facets of their diversity that are most important to them and how that has helped develop their strengths and values and who in their life is really functioning as chosen family. And then in Start 5 practice, you see an example of a between sessions form that takes a discussion of values and strengths where the client continues to reflect on and write about and identify the values and strengths that are most important to them. And that they may be able to then call upon and utilize as they're working on their depression, and who in their life they may share those with that can be a special source of support. So again, assessment is relatively an important part of our clinical work with aging individuals. In Chapter 3 of the Clinician Guide, we provide information and recommendations and thinking about intake assessment, routine outcome monitoring with your clients, and that's on pages 35 to 58 in the Clinician Guide. But then also in Appendix D, we provide client-friendly, ready-to-use forms that are in the public domain and available for you to use with your clients in several of the different assessment domains that are recommended in Chapter 3. Caregiving module, we're introducing the concept of caregiving and discussing that caregiving relationships can be through a variety of relationships, friends, family, chosen family. Can be precipitated by a specific medical diagnosis like cancer or Alzheimer's disease. We also have a large number of individuals who are functioning as in grandfamilies as the primary caretaker for grandchildren, and they have caregiving responsibilities. So you see here the 5 different domains that are outlined in this module. And again, you wouldn't necessarily cover all of these with any given client. So we have material specific to self-compassion and how caregivers can strategically and proactively treat themselves more kindly, how they can identify and manage unhelpful thoughts about caregiving, asking for help. We return to the concepts of behavioral activation that we used in the early Skills for Doing module on positive activities for the family member, for the caregiver, for them together, and then specific stress reduction strategies. So here are just a couple of examples of some of the forms that we provide in the workbook. And you see the companions between materials in Care 2 and Care 3 to introducing self-criticism versus kindness, and really introducing what self-kindness means, what would it mean for the caregiver to treat themselves kindly. And in these forms, whenever we have questions that are part of the Learn forms, we're really encouraging the client, whether it's within telehealth or in face-to-face, in-person clinical settings, for them to take the time to write down some of their thoughts so that they can reflect on that between sessions. So this isn't just a verbal dialogue, but an opportunity for them to write down some of their responses. And then here you see, again, a companion between Care 5 Learn, which is talking about the skill of giving oneself credit for things that are going well, and a example of a practice form. So managing okay is good enough, and examples over a week in which they're beginning to self-monitor things that may not have been perfect, but that were managed well enough for that day. Here's another example of a skill on self-encouragement, in which we have in Care 6 Learn the didactic information, where we're looking at where the client is looking at these materials at the same time that the clinician is, and talking through the example of Paula, and then having that discussion about for your client situations in the past where they really overcame an initial challenge, and encouraging thoughts that they used, and then developing that skill of self-encouragement and really developing specific language over time that the caregiver is beginning to write down and to try out on themselves as a way of fostering self-encouragement. Here's another example on unhelpful thoughts, in which Care 7 Learn is the didactic sheet. We're beginning to talk about the unhelpful thought patterns that are most challenging for a specific client, and then some ways that could be applied between session on thinking about modifying that. And you're going to see over the workbook that we play around with a variety of different within session practice forms to really fit different clients' interests and needs. So some that involve more writing, some that involve more checkoff boxes, just as reminders of some possibilities for them. And then here in Care 8 Learn, and then the companion practice sheet, we cover the skill of asking for help from family. We talk through, again, in session, what some of the basic recommendations are of asking for something specific. If decline, having another request handy, how to be flexible and creative. And then there's an opportunity for some problem solving between session regarding that. And then we also have information, as I indicated, on behavioral activation for the care recipient, for the caregiver, and then for the two of them together. And here's an example with Care 11 Learn and Care 12 Practice, the companion sheets of beginning to talk about planning positive shared activities together, and then how someone could actually develop a list that then is a checkoff box. So in this situation, the client would actually within session begin writing down their ideas of specific activities, such that the work between session is really then just checking off, the day of the week in which they tried to do that activity, and then what they learned about that. We know that self-care is an important part of caregiving. We intentionally place these materials later on in the module. We don't start there. For a variety of reasons. And here's an example of a learn form where you're beginning to have the discussion regarding, what does it really mean to be able to continue to be able to provide care? And that involves taking care of your physical health and your needs to feel connected with others and other areas of wellness. And what does that mean for a given individual? And then here's an example of a checkoff list for Care 13 Practice, where a client could identify the ones that they specifically want to focus on, and then circle the day, the week in which they were able to do that, and make a rating on really, what was their response to doing that? Did it help? Did it make things worse? What do they think? And so again, an opportunity to just sort of do some experiments together to figure out what are the most important strategies for a given client who has caregiving responsibilities. And then we continue with the theme of self-care by using the concept of R&R, right? Rest and recuperation from the military, because for some older clients, that's going to resonate with them more than just saying you need to do things for yourself. And so here's where we introduce the concept, and then here is a different type of a more journal form where they're able to write down the day of the week and just what they did for a little break, a big break, saying it. It can be a range of things, sometimes just taking a couple of minutes, sometimes bigger forms of respite. Know that in our clinical work with caregivers, it's important to have resources handy to be able to foster their connection to the additional services and information that they need. So we provide in the workbook some of the national resources for caregivers and 1-800 numbers where they can get started, and then finding connections to more local support. And so, as I indicated, we have a large number of learn and practice sheets that are part of this module. We wouldn't expect you to necessarily use all of them with any given client. When you're applying this with someone who really wants to, for whom caregiving a pretty major role in their life and a stressor, because we've had clinicians ask us for recommendations of which of these forms would hang together, I'm now going to walk through some possibilities for session by session. How would the learn and practice forms accompany themselves? But again, these are just suggestions, and you can really pick and choose and decide what's going to work for the needs and situations of any given client. So here in session 1, you see that we're continuing with the review of therapy goals, and we're doing the introduction to the module and introducing that concept of self-kindness. And then in session number 2, we're focusing on that skill of self-encouragement that's so important. So you see here 3 different learned forms regarding stress management, giving credit and encouraging, different possibilities for practice forms where both could be used or just one could be used, depending upon what feels to be a relatively good fit for that specific caregiver. And then in a proposed session 3, we've specifically focused on helpful thoughts about caregiving, introducing that concept. This might be a client for whom you haven't previously covered cognitive therapy skills. You haven't used the skills for thinking module yet in the core module section. And so you're continuing with unhelpful thoughts in session 4. And then, we make note that for some caregivers in which their self-talk and the cognitions that they have regarding their situation are really stuck points for them, and quite unhelpful, that this might be a point in your work on caregiving where then you and your clients could shift to the more in-depth resources for cognitive reappraisal in the skills for thinking module, but then apply all of those strategies specifically with the caregiving situation in mind. So as opposed to all situations, if you then transitioned to skills for thinking, you're really then focusing on caregiving related thoughts and reactions. Session 5 has the introduction to behavioral activation, specifically for the family member. And then session 6, focusing on shared behavioral activation. And again, some of your clients may have already completed skills for doing that earlier core module on behavioral activation. So this is really just a refresher and a reminder of bringing those ideas and strategies into their life as a caregiver. And then in session 7, we have the staying able to provide care, which we find typically just that learn form and beginning to look at the practice form together tends to be a full session. So with that emphasis on physical health, and then transitioning to the self-care for respite, for R&R, and then the review. So again, this isn't meant to be a lockstep approach. You don't necessarily have to do these materials in these orders, but if someone came in and it was clear that caregiving stress was a significant contributor to their depression, then a full 8 sessions, so 2 months of weekly attention on caregiving issues in a very strategic, structured way, we find to be helpful. We make some additional recommendations for clinicians in the clinical guide on pages 236 to 242, reminding to link the assessment to your conceptualization and treatment planning. And we do have assessment-specific recommendations for caregiving issues. As I indicated, connecting clients with community resources is really important for you as a clinician to really understand the implications for different caregiving relationships and different types of caregiving. As I mentioned, attending to caregiving related thoughts and reactions and beliefs can be relatively important, and then responding to suspected elder abuse. And we make some recommendations for that in the clinician guide. So, as I started out this overview, sort of making the point that we want to call upon habits as an important concept in our work with individuals in treating later life depression, and that our approach is that although insight can be useful, it does not automatically lead to behavior change, right? If that was true, we'd have a much healthier society than we currently do. And so we're really encouraging you in the use of the word habits and to focus on one or two areas of change at the same time, and focusing on building healthy habits, which means sustained attention and repetition over time, as opposed to jumping from topic to topic to topic. We provide additional information and suggestions in this chapter 14 of the clinician guide. And, one of the things that we have built within the entire workbook is attention to what we've been learning in psychotherapy research regarding the importance of routinely monitoring clinical outcomes for patients. And the case has been made that now the data are so clear on how clients improve through the process of focusing on targeted therapy goals and monitoring their progress over time, that it's now considered a part of ethical practice. So we build that into within each module, in which there's an opportunity early on in the practice sheets to review the ongoing current therapy goals and where they see their progress in specific therapy goals. We have a form caregiving module that allows the client and you together to develop a therapy goal that's specific to their caregiving situation. And then we provide a form in each one of the modules. Here's the one from Care 16 Learn, reminding us to review routinely with our clients how we think about progress is made in therapy, that it's not linear or stair-step, that it's a sawtooth curve with some improvements and setbacks. And that it's one of those reasons, because that's the way progress in therapy typically happens, that it's so important to have some way of writing down and identifying where progress is being made. Because in this example, if we look at session 5, where someone seemed to make great progress in a previous session, and then the next week their depression scores went way down, if you and your client had not been tracking where they saw themselves in a structured way in terms of assessing their depression, assessing their therapy goals, they would be quite discouraged and feel like they're not making any progress at all, when in fact they have made progress from when they've started. So we provide that. And so, here's the part of the overview where I'm going to be providing just a couple of different recommendations and tips for within session. We suggest that you begin your sessions with a warm greeting. It's so good to see you. Let's start by reviewing, how you're doing on your depression questionnaire, and then we'll make a short list of topics for today. That's instead of, hi, how have you been? How's your week been? What would you like to talk about? We also encourage you to consider using Start for Practice, which is a way for clients to routinely prepare for their next session. We find that 5 to 10 minutes the day before or the session, where the client is just jotting down a couple of ideas, can go a long way to them starting their session really ready to work with you. We encourage clinicians to stay specific to avoid overly abstract discussions. So we want to have quite a bit of our therapy sessions working with specifics and details, experiences on specific days, as opposed to overly general conversations, and that those between session practice forms can be so important in both skill development and on the individual retaining and maintaining those after therapy is over. So to do that, we're using the concept of home practice instead of homework. We want this to be a collaborative exercise each session in which this is discussed jointly with the client and the therapist together, working on what the best home practice for them this week. You're starting in session. Clients are writing down something as an example on the form, so they're never ending their session in the middle of the week looking at a practice form and really feeling at a loss as to how to get started. You're doing some strategy on day and times to complete, and then you're anticipating and problem solving potential barriers to then being able to complete that home practice between now and the next time that you're going to meet. So here's that is so basic but so important in providing enough time at the end of session for the client to just very briefly write down some words and phrases to remind them of the key points for the session. What did they focus on? What do they want to remember? What do they want to specifically remember? What would you as a therapist hope that they would remember? You can add to that a reminder of what their between session practice might be, and then whether they're calling upon anyone in their life to help support them, and certainly when the next appointment day and time is. So session pacing is important in this work, that you want to provide enough time at the end of the session to do that end of session summary for you to be able to clarify any questions that the client has about the home practice, and for you to be able to ask for feedback and provide feedback. So starting with, we've got a couple of minutes before we want to wrap up. I'm curious, is there anything that I said or did in our session today that didn't sit well with you, that felt off? This would be a good time for us to talk about that. And we know from the research literature that eliciting feedback at the end of session can go a long way to identifying potential ruptures early on in the process and preventing substantive therapeutic ruptures. And then just want to be encouraging and to remind, not in an overly rah-rah cheerleader way, but in an authentic, honest way, the things that you find to be encouraging in their progress, and why you see signs for them to be hopeful in the work that they're doing to improve their quality of life. So we provide a practice form at the very end of the module as you're wrapping up attention on caregiving issues to identify the skills, the specific practice forms that were most important for them, so that they can really sort of highlight that. And that might be something that they want to go back to and look at during specifically stressful situations. And then we're helping them look ahead to say, what are specific situations that are common for me or that I can anticipate in the future that would be particularly stressful, particularly challenging. And then what's the skill or the specific practice form from this module that I might want to refresh and return to during that challenging situation, to remind myself that I've done some work in this area and that I've developed some good strategies that could be applied to that future situation. We've provided a series of tip sheets. Here are the three on general strategies on attending to physical and medical issues, and on within session strategies at the Optimal Aging Center's website. And then at the Optimal Aging website is more information on consultation that's available, as well as the links to the training videos provided at the E4 Center. With that, we are done with our overview on skills for caregiving, and I hope that you've found this overview helpful.